Hello and welcome to all new Rainforest QA users. Welcome to the group training webinar. So we have a lot of stuff to cover today, so we'll just go ahead and dive right in. So first, to quickly introduce myself, my name is Natalie and I'm a member of our customer success team. So let's go through the agenda. We have a bunch of stuff to talk about today, and then we'll get started. So first, we are going to go through some housekeeping items related to this webinar. We'll do a high-level introduction to Rainforest for those of you who are brand new to the platform. We will go through some basic QA principles to kind of set the stage for some of the concepts that we're going to talk about today. We'll jump into test writing, how to write the perfect Rainforest test, and some best practices around that. Then we will dive into test results, so how to interpret your test results and best practices around results triage. Then we will look at test suite organization and how to organize your test suite like a pro. And then finally, we will dive into Rainforest reporting and some of the cool insights that you can get out of the platform. So on to a few housekeeping items. First thing is you're muted, so feel free to make sound or talk to one another, and you don't have to worry that you'll disrupt the group. The second thing is to please ask questions as they come up. In the GoToWebinar modal, you'll see a little chat bubble or a chat widget. So you can type your questions in there and I'll be answering your questions via email. So, just check your email after you ask a question and you'll see a response there and we can have conversations that way. Next piece of housekeeping is around what we will and won't be covering in the webinar today. Rainforest is a pretty big platform with a number of different products and features, and we only have a 1 hour today. So for the sake of time, we'll just be covering the core platform. So that is our web crowd testing. So that's writing tests in plain English and then executing them against our crowd of human testers. For those of you who have some of the product add-ons listed below here, we won't be covering them today, but I have linked out some of our help documentation to help you get started with those things. And I'll also share the deck after this webinar so you can click through the links on your own time. And then for the more technical folks with us here today, at the bottom of this table, you'll see developer tools. And I've linked out some help documentation surrounding our command line interface, our APIs, how to hook Rainforest into your CI and things like that. So definitely check out the Help Center as well. That'll be a great resource for you. So on to the fun stuff. First, what is Rainforest? So at a very high level, Rainforest is basically an easier way to do QA. For developers, what that essentially means is that you can write tests in plain English and then run them at the speed of automation, all within your developer workflow. And then to QA and product folks out there, it basically means offloading the manual, repetitive, and tedious aspects of QA so that you can focus on more strategic and creative work. The Rainforest product and platform is built upon a crowd of thousands of real human testers that are distributed all over the world. And we have hundreds of different browser and mobile VM combinations that you can execute your tests against. And we have a results verification algorithm so you can really trust the results that you're getting back from Rainforest. And then finally, we have a variety of different integrations with business tools like Slack, Pivotal Tracker, Jira, HipChat, and then we also have a CLI and open APIs. So diving a little bit deeper into how Rainforest actually works, essentially you can write and run functional tests via the UI, which is where we'll be mainly spending our time today. And then for the more technical folks, you can use the API or even run tests via your own CI tool. And then every test is sent to at least 3 testers from our crowd of thousands of real human testers. And the tests are executed in parallel. And then our Rainforest results algorithm kind of layers on top to verify the results that you're getting back from us. And the results themselves are displayed via the UI, which is how we'll be looking at them today. Or you can feed results into your business tools like Jira or Slack. All right, so jumping into a couple of basic QA principles to kind of set the stage for some of the concepts that we'll be touching on today. So for those of you who are brand new to QA, I think this will be really helpful. And then for those of you who are, more seasoned QA folks, just bear with us for a couple minutes. So when thinking about how to determine testing focus and which tests you want to get into Rainforest first, and even beyond that, thinking about just at a high level what your testing strategy should be, it's important to understand a few of these different industry accepted types of tests. What we're looking at here is called the testing utility pyramid. And at the very top, we're looking at our smoke tests, then our happy path tests, regression tests, etc. And these pieces are ordered in terms of most critical to least critical to test, and then easiest to write at the top and most difficult to write at the bottom. Starting with smoke tests are most critical and easiest to write. They typically cover the most critical functionality within our application. So from an e-commerce perspective, this would be the ability to sign up, to log in, to add an item to a cart. These are really critical flows, and the tests written to cover them would be referred to as smoke tests. And since your smoke tests cover such base level functionality, they tend to be the easiest to write, and we recommend getting them into Rainforest first. Next, we have our happy path tests, also known as user advocacy flows, and these tend to cover the most trafficked areas within an application. So the things that your users are doing the most within your application. And then we have our regression tests, which can be thought of as a more in-depth inspection of an application. They tend to cover known tactical breaking points within an application. And then finally, we have our edge cases, which are the least critical and tend to be the most difficult to write, just because they can be so specific and so complicated, and they tend to cover the areas of an application that are not very trafficked, so flows that are very rarely done by your users. Cool. So the approach that we typically recommend following when getting up and running with Rainforest for the first time is called feature-driven testing. So essentially, you break up your application into different flows, and those would be your smoke tests, happy path tests, and regression tests, and generally follow what we call this 5-10-15 rule. It's kind of a rule of thumb to help you prioritize. So what the rule basically is saying is how many smoke tests you should have for how many happy path and regression tests. So first, we recommend thinking of your entire application and breaking it up into the 5-10-15 rule. And then once you've gotten your first, let's say, 30 tests into Rainforest, then we recommend kind of featuring out, looking at individual features and then starting to focus on what the smoke test might be for that feature versus the happy path test versus the regression test. So here are some examples in an e-commerce situation of what your smoke, happy path, and regression tests would be. So our smoke tests, as we said earlier, would be like sign up, sign in, search, add to cart, checkout, revenue impacting and really critical things tend to also be categorized into the smoke category as well. Happy path tests might be, changing quantity in a cart or leaving a review for a past purchase. And then regression tests, for example, would be subscribing or unsubscribing to emails or verifying aspects of product details pages. And then in terms of thinking about how to set a cadence for running your different types of tests, we typically recommend running smoke tests daily against the single most the single top browser that represents the highest percentage of your user traffic, or hooking your smoke tests into a CI tool if you have one. And then happy path and regression tests, we tend to see most of our customers lump these into one kind of overall regression suite, and they'll run it before major pushes to production. And the regression suite is typically run against the top 3 to 5 browsers that represent your user traffic patterns. All right, so moving on to how to write the perfect Rainforest test. We're going to go through the examples today from the perspective that we're Wikipedia, and we're trying to get our first test into Rainforest. So I've pulled up Wikipedia here, and our first smoke test that we want to get into Rainforest, I've decided will be creating an actual account in Wikipedia. So let's watch me go through the flow right now, and then we'll look at a test written to actually represent this flow. So if we were to write this test, the first step is we're brought to the homepage here, and then I need to click English because unfortunately I only speak English. Then to create an account for the first time, I'll click the Create Account button up here at the top right, and then I'll enter a username and a password, and then I'll just do the password again. I'll skip the email address part because that's optional, and then I'll do the CAPTCHA security check at the bottom. And then I click Create My Account. And let's wait for it to load. Cool. And so now I'm in. And the way that I know that I'm in is because I see my username up here at the top right, and then I see log out up here as well. And then I also see this welcome to Wikipedia message here. So I'd want to verify that I see those things. Great. So jumping into Rainforest, we're first going to go through the exercise of actually, looking at that test that covers the flow that I just went through right now. So most of you, I imagine, have logged into the platform at least once before, so this shouldn't look too unfamiliar. Basically, what we're looking at here are some of the nav icons on the left. We're mainly going to be focusing on tests and on settings a little bit. So imagining that I'm brand new to Rainforest and wanting to write this test for Wikipedia, the first thing that I need to do before even writing the test is to go into settings. And there I would add Wikipedia as an actual site to test on. So we clicked on settings and then clicked on sites here. And this is where our sites and environments live. So the sites are the web properties that we want to test. And then the environment is the stage in development in which we want to inject rainforest testing. So I've actually gone ahead and already added the sites. And then I have my 2 environments here and the corresponding URLs. So once the sites are added, I'll go into where I've actually written the test to cover that Wikipedia flow that we looked at. So first, let me point out a couple of key aspects of this test, and then we can go into the actual test steps and take a look at those. So first, my test has a title, and whenever you create a test, you need to title it. The title would ideally allow someone to understand what the test covers without having to actually jump into the test and read the steps. That'll make things a lot easier, especially if you work with multiple people on a team in Rainforest. And then we have our starting URL up here as well. This is the URL that testers will start on when they begin the test. And we actually just added this URL as a site when we were in the settings site section. So that's where this is pulling from. And then we also have the ability to append things to the URL. I'll skip that though, because we don't need it for this test. And then next we have our test steps. So every Rainforest test is comprised of steps, and every step has 2 parts. So we have the action, which is what we want the testers to actually do. And then we have the question, which is a yes/no verification of expected behavior. And the way that testers run through these tests is in a sequential order through the steps. So if they're able to answer yes to the question portion of the first step, then they continue on to the next step. If they're not able to answer yes to the question portion, then they don't continue on and they fail the test, and their testing session ends for them there. A common question that we get is, can or will testers continue past fail? And the answer to that is no. So let me jump into some test writing best practices, and that'll kind of help us understand better what we were looking at there in the test. So first best practice is to limit ambiguity and vagueness when writing test steps. So something to keep in mind is that our testers have probably never seen your application before, and so it's important to describe the things that you want them to do and see and verify in very objective and clear terms. So we recommend really short and simple actions, and to keep the question portion of each step to a single question. So a really good kind of formula to help you structure your test steps is action word plus feature name or object name plus location. So an example would be click the login button at the top right of the homepage, for example, or click the avatar icon at the bottom left. So looking back at our test, we can see the first step says to click the English link at the around the globe here on the Wikipedia site. And then we ask them, are you brought to a page with a header that looks like this? And then we've inputted a screenshot showing them what the header should actually look like. And that header is just up there. So that actually brings us into our second best practice, which is adding screenshots into your test steps. It's super easy to add a screenshot. You just drag and drop it into the test step, and we get this kind of fancy syntax right here. You can also add a bunch of different types of files into your test steps. So you could add a PDF file, a PNG, you could add a GIF. There are a bunch of different options, and it's the same kind of drag and drop way to add it in. And now, where are screenshots helpful? They can be super helpful when directing testers to an icon that might be difficult to describe, or when directing them to an area of a page. But screenshots aren't completely necessary for all steps. So you definitely don't need to add them into every single test step, but recommended usage or uses would be for icons, as I mentioned, that are difficult to describe, or for validating the appearance of a page or specific pieces of data, or confirming UI elements, for example. Cool. So the next step that we have asked testers to complete was clicking the Create Account button at the top right of the page. So we say select the Create Account button right up there. And then are you brought to a page titled Create an Account? So here we can see it written out. So this brings us into our next best practice, which is probably our most important one, and it is called the quotes rule. So all of our testers are trained on a few specific testing rules, and one of these is to treat things that are in quotations a little bit differently. So anything that you add into your test steps that you put in quotes will be copy checked by our testers, which means that they'll check for exact spelling, spacing, and punctuation. So let me jump back to Wikipedia. So here at the top right of the page, very top right, it says create account, capital C, lowercase a. And we've made sure that that's reflected here in the text that is in quotes. So capital C, lowercase a here. So if we had represented this differently in our test steps, like capital C, capital A, then it would no longer match what was on that page. And the testers would be trained to fail that step. So it's really important to keep that in mind when writing your tests. And then another example here, if it says login with a capital L, lowercase I, if you were to write it as all caps login and keep it in quotes within a test step, then testers would fail that. So a good use of the quotes rule is if there is a redesign that requires very specific copy changes that you want to verify, for example, then you might want to put things in quotes in your test steps. And then the second part of this quotes rule is called the underscore rule. So if you enter an underscore in your test, then testers are trained to treat it as a placeholder, and they'll accept any value in its place. So an example here would be back to the e-commerce example from before. If you're having testers search for specific items, you'll often see this at the bottom of an e-commerce page, like you're seeing 1 through 24 of let's say 200 results for home and kitchen. So you could put a placeholder in there, and then testers would accept that value, even if it's 5 or if it's 200, for example. Cool. So back in our test, the next step that we had testers complete was let's go back to create an account. And then they need to fill out this form here, as you remember. So they need to fill out the username and then the same password twice and then complete the CAPTCHA. So this step here represents that. And as we are seeing, I've added a couple of variables into this test. So for those of you who are new to the platform, we have a few different kinds of variables, and you're able to add step variables into your test steps pretty easily, as I'm showing here. And then we have 3 different types of variables that I'll talk about real quick with you, and those are built-in variables, tabular variables, and custom variables. So starting from the top, we have built-in variables, which are discrete and random data that you can inject into your test steps. So a few examples are random name, random email, and random inbox. And then we also have other things here like random password, random image, random number, random address. And then a great use case is back to our Wikipedia example of creating an account. And so, the built-in variables are a perfect fit for that. And then one kind of miscellaneous piece of information about our random built-in variables is that we have random inbox, which corresponds to our random email variable. So if, for example, we wanted testers to confirm that they've received we have tabular variables, which allow you to create and define your own variables actually via a CSV file and then upload them into Rainforest. So a good example for this would be, let's say you have unique user login credentials and you need every single tester who logs into your application to be given a different set of login credentials. That would be a great use case for tabular variables, and I've included a little screenshot here on the side to show an example of what the CSV file for email and password credentials might look like. And then something important to keep in mind if you are going to create your own tabular variables is that there's actually a formula for the minimum number of rows that must be contained in the CSV file. And that formula is the number of tests containing the variable that you plan to run at the time or at the same time, multiplied by the number of platforms that you plan to run those tests against, and then multiplied by 6. And 6 is the maximum number of testers that we might send to your test at once. Usually we send 3 testers, but it can be up to 6. Then something to note is that you can mark your tabular variables as reusable, and this is a setting that you'll select when you actually upload your CSV file. So by marking them as reusable, you actually don't have to follow this formula. Instead, you can have as few rows of data as you want, but what it will do, however, is set up kind of a one-in, one-out gate system, kind of like where a user has a key or users have sets of keys and they have to give them back before other users can check them out. so that no two users will be using the same variable at the same time. So keep that in mind. It can cause longer run times when setting up your variables as reusable. And then lastly, we have custom variables. With the custom variables, there is a one-to-one relationship between the variable and the corresponding value. So every single variable only has one single corresponding value. And then an example use case here would be like a test credit card number, for example. So if you're an e-commerce application and you want testers to use the same test credit card number every time that they go through tests, then you might want to create a custom variable for them. So let me show you in settings real quick where you would actually add and update and view your step variables. So here in settings and then step variables is the right page. So to run through the different variable types again, we have the built-in random variables down here at the bottom, and they're built into the application. And so they're kind of fixed, and you can see the different value types down here. And then we have the tabular variables right here. These are the ones that you create and define yourself and then upload via a CSV file. And those are up here. So you can add your variables really easily and then upload your CSV file. And then here I've actually already created and uploaded some tabular variables. So if I wanted to view them or swap out the CSV file, I could do that pretty easily down here. And then the last thing about tabular variables is you can actually mark them as reusable. So if you do mark them as reusable, it means that the values in the CSV file can repeat. So multiple testers might receive the same rows of the spreadsheet. Typically, our customers don't check this, but if you're fine with the values repeating, then feel free to check it. And then the last variable type that we went through were our custom variables, and those are up here at the top. So you can add your own pretty easily, and I've already added some just as an example. And then something to note here is that you can actually add a screenshot as a custom variable. It's kind of hacky. The way that you would do it is to drag and drop a screenshot into a test step, like here, for example. And then we see this kind of fun syntax, and then you'd copy and paste that, including the squigglies here, and then you'd have a screenshot as a custom variable. So just covering a couple FAQ items real quick, if you include variables of the same variable within multiple steps of the same test, something to keep in mind is that the variable is static within the same test, and so it'll be the same value in every test step. Second FAQ item we just went over, and that's the ability to add screenshots as custom variables. Great, so moving on to the last best practice, managing test length is definitely an important one. We recommend that you keep your tests between 5 and 15 steps in length, just because, for most of our customers, really quick feedback cycles are important, and the longer a test is and takes our testers to execute, then the longer it takes for you to get back your results. Also, tests over 20 steps actually have a higher chance of failure. So we definitely recommend keeping them short if possible. But that said, there are a few examples where long tests are perfectly acceptable. And one of those, for example, might be an end-to-end checkout flow, which sometimes can be hard to keep under 20 steps. Thus to our last best practice, which is using embedded tests. So you actually have the ability to embed tests within tests that you've already created. It's super easy. Let's just go back to the test that I created. So at the top right, next to the Add a Step button, you can click the little down arrow and then search for any test to embed. So I'll just choose any random test, and then here we go. I've embedded another test that I had created, and it now lives within this one as well. And I can go into the test itself if I needed to edit it. I can also click this Redirect Tester button, which basically will direct testers or redirect testers to the starting URL of this embedded test as they're going through this test. Or if I unselect it, then testers won't be redirected at all. And embedded tests are a great way to keep your tests really short and modular, kind of like Lego building blocks. And they're also a great time saver. So if you have the same repeated steps within multiple tests, like several steps that cover, login at the beginning of all your tests, for example, it can be much faster to just create that, the login steps as their own separate test, and then embed those within your other tests rather than writing the steps over and over each time. And then again, if I need to edit the specific test, I just go into the test itself, edit it there, and then those changes that I make would duplicate across every single test that contains this embedded test. So I just went ahead and deleted it. And And then the last kind of best practice that isn't in the deck here, but it's super important, is to preview your tests before actually running them. So the preview button is up here at the top right. And so before I go ahead and publish the test or even run it, I want to preview it. And previewing it allows me to experience the test as if I'm an actual tester. And so I can go through the steps myself. So I choose my environment here, and I'm going to choose production. And I could choose a location if I want to redirect my user traffic through a server in any of these locations. And then I choose one single browser platform that I want to preview the test against. Now I'll go ahead and click preview. So this is what testers will see when they actually go to execute your tests. They get reminded of our tester rules, they click I understand, and then they navigate to the starting URL, which I'm doing now, and click take screenshot, which begins recording their session. So my first step was to click the English link. So once I click that, it asks me if I'm brought to a header that looks like this, and then we see my screenshot. And yep, I see it right there in the VM, so I would click yes. If I click no, then this is what testers will see when they fail a step or fail a test. They're directed to give feedback as to why they failed the test. But if I go out of that and continue on by answering yes, then I can see the variables that I dropped into the test right here. And it's kind of cool. We can see how the data is actually delivered to testers. Awesome. So let's imagine that I've gone through all this and I was able to answer yes to every single question, meaning that I'm able to pass the test myself. Then I would want to go ahead and actually run the test. Now, this test is in draft mode, and when you're creating a test, they'll always be in draft mode by default. And draft mode basically just means that if I were to run this test, it would only be run against a single browser. And only one tester would go through the test when in draft mode. And the purpose of draft mode is really just to give you quick feedback cycles. And if your test is of a high quality and able to be passed by our tester or a draft mode tester, then once you're able to pass a test that way, then you might want to go ahead and publish it. And published tests are able to be run in groups together, whereas draft tests can only be run by themselves. Cool. So now that I have published this test, I am able to run it against a bunch of different browsers and platforms at once. And all three testers would execute my tests against each browser. Whereas again, in draft mode, it's just a single tester. So a couple of other things before we leave this test here. We have different icons at the top. So different things you can do with your test. You can duplicate, disable a test, or even delete it. Disabling a test will actually just stop the test from running as part of the group or as part of a test group. So let's say that the test needs to be refactored. You might want to disable it to prevent it from running as part of a larger run group. And we'll get into a little bit later what the term run group means. And then you can click show or hide tester comments to show the comments from testers from your last test run. And then we have a few additional data attributes here, and I'll skip them for time, but you can kind of play around with these on your own time. All right, so next we will move on to how to interpret test results. So let's pretend like I'd gone ahead and actually run this test. I would jump into results here to see how the test actually did. So here on the results page, I can see all of my normal runs of my published tests. And then I can also toggle at the top to look at my draft runs as well. So that is here. And then I can also toggle to see the platforms that my tests were run against. And then I can also toggle between start time and run duration. And then next we see our test breakdown. So we can see how many tests we ran together, and then a breakdown of which passed versus failed. And then passed is green, of course, and red is failed. So let me go through the process of how we typically recommend triaging results. So we've clicked into the run summary page, and here we can see the breakdown of failed versus passed tests within this specific run. And if every test or if all the tests pass, we don't really need to click into them because there's no further investigation needed. But in this top one right here, we did have one failed test. So here we're looking at the test that failed. If multiple tests had failed, we'd see them all in a grouping here. And we can see the test name, the platform it failed on, the step that it failed on. If we hover over it, we can see exactly what the step was and the tester feedback. And then we also have the ability to categorize our failures at the right, which we definitely want to do. But first, let's jump into the test to do a bit more investigation before we go ahead and categorize the failure. So this isn't the test that we had written before. This is a slightly different one that I had wrote intending for it to fail. So in this test, we're asking the testers to go to the Wikipedia page, click English, and then verify that it says, "Welcome to the Wikipedia" at the top of the page. And as we can see here, it actually just says "Welcome to Wikipedia." There's no "the" in there. So as we can see in the tester feedback, the testers have picked up on that. And the fact that it's in quotations here, "Welcome to the Wikipedia," means that they will scrutinize it a bit more closely. So in this situation here, I made a mistake with the quotes rule, which we talked about a couple minutes ago. If I had not put "Welcome to the Wikipedia" in quotes, then testers would, probably understand my intent and probably pass the test. But because we put it in quotes, we're indicating that we want them to be really, really exact when it comes to copy checking the text here in quotes. So in this case here, just by reading the tester feedback, it's pretty obvious why the test failed, and we probably don't need to investigate further. But if we did, we can click into the tester video sessions here. Now, this is really cool here. We can watch the tester as they're going through the test, and we can also speed up or slow down the video. And this is really helpful if you're trying to understand what behavior on the page testers saw, like if you're investigating a defect that they reported. You also have the ability to check out a screenshot of the mouse movements. And product teams tend to really be excited by this because it kind of tends to indicate how usable their application is. And then finally, you also have the ability to download HTTP logs or the tester video. And then the last thing is that you can rate the testers as well. So if a tester does an awesome job on a really complicated test, feel free to give them 5 stars and leave a comment. But on the other hand, if they make a mistake or maybe don't follow the tester rules exactly, we rarely see this happen, but if you do see it, please report it by giving a tester a 1 or a 2 stars, and that will push them into a peer review system. And then in that system, they'll be given additional training if necessary, and if repeated errors are made, then they may be asked to leave the crowd. The quality of our crowd is really, really important to us, so if you see something, please rate the tester, and cool. So last thing that we'll want to do here is actually categorize this failure. And in this case, the test failed because of test instructions. So the failure reason is that it needs to be refactored. I also have the option to send, so I'll just write out a failure reason here. And then I have the option to send it to a different team member. I'm the only person in this test account here. But if you have additional team members that have been added to Rainforest, and let's say one of them is in charge of triage and refactor duty this week, then I might want to send the test failure to them, and then they'll get an email with information about it. And then I also have the option to set the test to draft. So I'm going to save this here. And then last thing is, before I leave this page, if I wanted to just go ahead and refactor the test real quick, I can jump into the test edit view from here and then edit the test steps. And then, so if I wanted to go in and edit the test steps, I could do so really easily here. And then I don't have the Jira integration set up here, but if I did, I could click this button to export my test failure to Jira, which would create a ticket for it. And that ticket would include the screenshot and a link to the tester video as well as it would pull the steps in the test that failed. So now that I've categorized this test, I can see the category here in my comments. And then if I'm looking at the overall results page, I can see that 100% of the failures in this run group here have been triaged and categorized. So we definitely recommend enforcing a process on your own teams of categorizing every single failure. It's the best way to ensure that every failure is looked at and gets a set of eyes on it. And then beyond that, by using these different preset categories, you have the ability over time to accumulate data and get more of an insight into the health of your test suite, or the different reasons why tests are failing, which can be really important. And if you're categorizing failures as bugs, or if you're discovering bugs with Rainforest, those kind of bug metrics can be really powerful. Awesome. So moving on to how to organize your test suite. So let me jump in here to the all tests view. I think when we first jumped into the test that we started with. I think we skipped over this view. So let me explain here what we're looking at real quick. So this is the all test page. And this is basically a library where we can see all of our tests, and then we have a few different layers of test suite organization here on the left. And then here on the right, we have our search and filter ability, which is really powerful. We can search for specific tests or text contained within test steps, or search by a variety of different data attributes as well. So to talk a little bit about test suite organization, the 3 layers of organization that we have here are features, save filters, and run groups. Our features are pretty self-explanatory. They're the way that you split out your application. So different customers use features in different ways, but examples here might be, my account could be a feature, or donations, or search, for example. And then it's really easy to drop tests into different features. And I will show you how to do that. So you can just click on them and then move them in or out of the feature pretty easily. And then next we have save filters, and save filters are saved custom views based off of test tags. So when we're looking at a test here, we have the ability to add different tags to the test. So we could choose from some that already exist, or we could easily create our own. So I'll just add one called Natalie. And then here in the save filter, we can use Boolean search logic to create different conditions for our save filters. And it's also really easy to add tags to test this way as well. And that's how you do it. You just click on them and then add tags there as well. And then again, it's really easy to move tests into features or in and out of filters. And then finally, we have run groups, which are less of a test suite organization kind of thing and more of a way to group tests together and then set those groups on cadence, on run cadences. So here I've created a smoke suite and a regression suite. So thinking back to what we learned at the beginning of the session about QA, basic QA principles, we learned that our smoke tests are the most important tests that cover the most critical functionality within our application. And we also learned that we recommend that smoke tests be run daily against a single browser as part of a smoke suite. So if we look at our smoke suite here, we've actually set this run group to run on a schedule. So here we can see that it's set to run every single business day at 4 a.m. And it's set to run against production and against the default location. And then we've also chosen what platforms it should run against. And here we've selected Chrome, which represents the highest, or we'd imagine, where the most user traffic originates from for Wikipedia. And, you can also edit your run groups or create new ones. It's super easy to add them as well. And you can also add features to feature folders or to run groups. And then looking here at our regression suite, we can see that we have not put it on a schedule. So it's just a bunch of tests that live together with these presets. And if we want to run it, we can just manually kick it off. Or, for more technical users, you can also hook Rainforest into your CI. So you could, run your smoke suite that way. Or you could run individual tests or features, filters, or run groups worth of tests, or whatever it may be. You could run those via the CLI as well. Cool. So this is a kind of visual that shows you, how you might interact with our test suite organization tools. So for the sake of time, I'll skip over this, but as I mentioned, I'll be sending you all this deck after the session. So you can look at this and kind of conceptualize how you might break out tests into run groups versus features, and how you might implement a tagging strategy as well. So here we can see the tests, and these little tag icons are examples of tags that I've added to these different tests. Okay, so moving on to our last topic, which is Rainforest reporting. So the way that we get to the reporting page is via the little report widget on the left nav. I've actually jumped into our own internal Rainforest account here. This is the account that we at Rainforest use to actually test our own application. So you might be seeing some slightly different stuff, but I just want to make sure that we have a lot of good example data to look at. So we've partnered with Domo to get our reporting. So here you can see the different Domo cards that we currently have available. We're constantly adding to this and trying to kind of hone and refine it. So if you have any suggestions about new cards that you'd like added or different insights that you'd like to see, just let our support team know by chatting them via the intercom bubble. So some of the cool insights that you can see here are insights into your test suite health, run results by run group, run results by environment, and then what we were looking at earlier when we were categorizing failures is who on the team has actually been categorizing failures, what they've been categorizing them as, and then failure categories over time. So we can see from the different presets, how many failures were categorized as bug versus needs refactor, for example. And then these cards are really flexible, so you can change the periods of time that you're looking at. You can also change add or change filters as well, which is pretty cool. So definitely play around with this on your own time. So we will, now we can change it to a table view as well, so you can get the chart view or the table view. And then up here, this is a pretty important one as well. We can see engagement with failed test results. So that's, what percentage of test failures your team is actually clicking into. So that's definitely an important one to look at and pay attention to. All right, so now I'm going to jump out of our internal Rainforest account and back into the test account that we've been working out of today. So last stop is the Rainforest dashboard, which is the very top nav icon on the left. So here we can see some high-level QA metrics from our account over the past week. And then we also can see here a list of our tests that we've, or our failures that we've categorized as needs refactor in the last week, and the failures that we categorized as bug in the last week. So we can work off of this kind of like a to-do list and, go into the test that needs to be refactored, rewrite it. And then when we're done, we can just check it off the list. And then the next time that we refresh this page, that item from the list will have disappeared. Same thing goes for bugs. So, if I need to, if I have my own process around verifying bugs or, reporting them into an internal system, I can do that as well and then just check them off the list. And then a few other things before we wrap up here. Click the little question mark at the bottom to access our Help Center, our API docs, and our CLI documentation as well. And then the What's New will link you to our change log, where you can see some of the new features and enhancements that have been recently released by the product team. And then finally, at the bottom right, you can see the intercom chat bubble. So this is how you would reach our tech support team. They're very responsive. So, if you have questions that aren't answered by our Help Center, definitely go ahead and start a conversation with them. And that just about wraps things up. So I think it's pretty important to recap what we've learned today, just so that it's all still top of mind. So first thing we covered was around writing tests. We learned how to add a screenshot into our test steps by just dragging and dropping it. And we learned that we could add different types of files into our tests as well, like PDFs and PNGs. We also learned about the quotes rule, about how we need to be really careful when adding quotes into our tests. And we learned about the placeholder rule. So, using an underscore to act as a placeholder within a test step as well. And then we learned about step variables. So we learned how to use our Rainforest random built-in variables. We also learned how to define our own variables via CSV and upload them to Rainforest. And then we also learned how to create our own custom variables, which, as we remember, just has a single value assigned to each variable. And then we also learned some best practices around limiting ambiguity in our test steps, managing test length, so trying to keep our tests to under 20 steps if possible, and using embedded tests where we can to keep our tests really tight and modular. And then we learned about how to preview our tests. So as you remember, how to go through the test as if we're an actual tester before we publish the test or add it into our test suite. And then we learned how to organize our tests using features and using filters, which, as we remember, are based off of test tags, and then how to organize our tests into run groups, and then either set schedules for when we want our run groups to run or how to manually kick them off. And then we also learned that we could integrate our run groups into our CI. And then finally, we learned about how to interpret test results and how to triage them. So just to hit on the important parts here, investigate all failures. So if you see any failed tests, definitely go through the investigation steps, which, as we remember, are to read the tester feedback and to watch the tester reproduction videos as well to investigate failures further. We also learned how to categorize our failures as bug, needs refactor, or some of the other presets that we have available to be selected. Again, definitely, categorize all of your failures. I really can't recommend that enough. 6 months down the road, once you have a bunch of really rich data and insights that you can look into, you'll definitely be thankful that you did categorize those failures. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. I want to thank all of you so much for taking the time to learn how to use the Rainforest platform here today. We're really so excited to see how you leverage the platform. And if any last questions, or if you have any last questions right now, please ask them via the chat bubble here in the GoToMeeting. Or if questions come up later, you can chat our tech support team or email them at support@rainforestqa.com. Again, I'll be sharing this deck with you after the session is over, so be on the lookout for that and feel free to share it with the rest of your team as well. That's all for today, and happy testing.